There's a question that has divided historians for decades. Could the most powerful empire in the world be defeated without a single bullet fired? It sounds more like legend than history, but that is precisely the story of Mahatma Gandhi. In a world where power is so often decided by violence, Gandhi chose a path that ran entirely against the current. He called on millions of people to face batons, prisons, and even gunfire with peaceful non-compliance. He believed that truth was stronger than violence and that conscience cut sharper than any blade. And yet, this is also where the story grows complicated. How could a man who preached peace lead a struggle that shook the British Empire to its core? Why do some hail him as the father of the nation, while others see him as a deeply contradictory figure? And if his philosophy truly worked, why did India's independence still come bound to one of the bloodiest partitions of the 20th century? Perhaps what makes Gandhi one of the most debated figures in history is not what he did, but what he refused to do. He refused to seek revenge when he was oppressed. He refused to answer violence with violence. He refused to believe that people had to kill one another to win their freedom. But did those choices truly change the world? Or did they only succeed because history happened to bend in their favor? And behind the image of a frail old man in a white loincloth, walking with a bamboo staff, who was he really? A saint, a brilliant strategist, or a man carrying both towering ideals and troubling contradictions? Today, we explore the life of Mahatma Gandhi, from an unknown young lawyer thrown off a train in South Africa, to the man who became the world's enduring symbol of nonviolence. This is not just the story of a man who helped change India's destiny. It is the story of an idea that changed how humanity itself understands power, justice, and freedom. Chapter 1. Child of the Merchant Class. The town of Porbandar sits at the edge of the Arabian Sea, on the western coast of the Kathiawar Peninsula in the Gujarat region of India. Its whitewashed walls soak up the heat of the day and release it slowly through the night. The sound of the waves almost never stops. People call Porbandar the White City because the lime plaster throws back the sunlight so fiercely that at noon it hurts to look straight at it. It was in this small town, on October 2nd, 1869, in a 3-story brick house on Kirti Mandir Street, that a baby boy was born. His parents named him Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. No one in the neighborhood imagined that this child would change the world. And in truth, given his family's standing, there was every reason to expect an ordinary life ahead of him. The Gandhi family belonged to the Vaishya caste within the Hindu social hierarchy, the merchant and farming class. They were not nobility, nor were they Brahmin priests holding society's highest esteem, but neither were they poor. Mohandas's father, Karamchand Gandhi, served as chief minister of Porbandar, the top administrative official of a small princely state under British protection. He was a practical man, not highly educated but sharp, gifted with an instinct for mediation and diplomacy. He had married 4 times, not by choice, but because his first 3 wives had each died in turn. His 4th wife, Putlibai, was Mohandas's mother. Putlibai was devout to the point that Jain monks would come to her home simply to talk with her about doctrine. She fasted on religious holy days as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, and at times fasted further still as a form of spiritual discipline. For her, compassion toward all living things, restraint, and honesty were not rules to be obeyed. but a natural way of living, practiced every day. Mohandas grew up watching his mother live this way from the time he was small, and those values seeped into him without his noticing, the way water seeps into soil. As a child, Mohandas was not remarkable, nor was he any kind of prodigy. He would later write in his autobiography that he had been a timid boy, afraid of the dark, afraid of ghosts, afraid of snakes, and afraid even of what other people might think of him. He dared not speak up in front of a crowd. After school, he would run straight home because he did not want anyone to talk to him, fearing he would be mocked. His schoolwork was middling, not brilliant, not poor. He did reasonably well in geography, less well in arithmetic and penmanship. But one small moment occurred when he was about 12 years old that Gandhi himself would remember for the rest of his life. In a school book, he read the story of King Harishchandra from Hindu epic literature, a king who lost his entire kingdom, his family, and his position rather than abandon the truth even once. The story haunted the boy so deeply that he acted it out alone in his room, weeping as he asked himself why people in real life could not live as truthfully as Harishchandra had. That was the question Mohandas Gandhi would spend his whole life trying to answer. But before that question could grow up alongside him, life arrived the way it usually did for children in 19th century India. At 13, Mohandas's family arranged his marriage to a girl his own age named Kasturba Mukherjee, the daughter of a local merchant. This was an ordinary custom in Indian society at the time, and neither family saw anything unusual in it. The wedding was carried out according to full Hindu ritual, with flowers, incense, and chanted prayers. Gandhi later admitted in his autobiography that in those early years he treated Kasturba with the selfish possessiveness of a boy rather than the love of a grown man. He was jealous, wanted to control her every movement, and would not allow her freedom to come and go as she pleased. Kasturba, by contrast, was quiet, patient, and never allowed her husband to fully bend her to his will. The marriage that began in that childish immaturity would last 62 years, spanning imprisonment, illness, fasts that brought them to the edge of death, and nights spent keeping watch over one another in the darkness of a jail cell. Kasturba would prove that she was no smaller a figure than the man history would come to call great. But before any of that, young Mohandas still had to pass through a stretch of his life that he never tried to hide, even though it did him little credit. As a teenager, Mohandas grew close to a friend he would later call a bad influence, though at the time he saw things differently. This friend believed that the British were strong and able to rule India because they ate meat, while Indians were weak because they were vegetarian. The logic sounds absurd, but to a 15-year-old boy who wanted to feel strong, it was persuasive enough. Mohandas secretly joined his friend in eating roasted goat meat a few times, in a secluded spot along a riverbank. At night, back home, he could not sleep, tormented by the feeling that he had betrayed his mother's teaching and the principle of nonviolence passed down by his ancestors. He also tried smoking for a brief period. These small acts left him so racked with guilt that he was physically sick, not from the food itself, but from the shame of it. In the end, he swore to himself he would never do it again, and he kept that vow. Gandhi recounted all of this in his autobiography, not as a confession, but to make a point. He was not born a perfect man. He stumbled, he made mistakes, and he chose to correct himself. That is what he wanted his readers to understand. In 1885, his father died after a long illness. Mohandas was 16, and his father's death left a wound in him that he rarely spoke of, but never forgot. That same year, Kasturba was pregnant with their first child, but the baby did not survive long after birth. In the span of a short time, the 16-year-old boy had lost his father, lost his child, and was left to ask himself who he was going to be in this life. An answer began to take shape when an uncle in the family proposed a plan. If Mohandas went to England to study law, he could become a lawyer and take over his father's position, providing for the whole family. The idea lit something in him that he had never quite felt before, an eagerness for a different horizon, a world larger than this small coastal town. But before he could set out, he had to face another challenge. His mother worried that in England he would follow British ways, eating meat, drinking alcohol, and keeping company with women. She took him to see a respected Jain monk and had him swear in front of the monk that he would touch no meat, drink no alcohol, and stay away from women for the entire time he was in England. Mohandas took the vow, and he kept it for all 3 years he spent on English soil, though it was not always easy. In September 1888, 18-year-old Mohandas Gandhi boarded a ship leaving Bombay for London. Kasturba had just given birth to their first surviving son, a boy named Harilal, only a few months earlier. Gandhi left it all behind: his mother, his wife, his child, and the town of Porbandar with its familiar whitewashed walls. He had no idea that this voyage across the sea would be the first step of a life that could not have been predicted. London greeted him with a biting cold and a sense of total unfamiliarity. The young Indian student put on a proper suit, learned to tie a necktie, bought a mirror to comb his hair in the English style, and even enrolled in dancing lessons and violin lessons because he believed these were things an English gentleman ought to know. He tried to fit in to an almost comical degree, and he knew it, but he kept trying anyway. But London gave Gandhi something no town or school in India ever had: books. He read voraciously. He read the Bible for the first time in his life and found himself drawn into the Sermon on the Mount, moved by Jesus' words about the meek and the poor. He read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time as well, also in London, in an English translation by 2 Western scholars, and found in it questions about duty and about selfless action that he would return to again and again for the rest of his life. He also found his first vegetarian community, the London Vegetarian Society, and became a member of its executive committee. This was the first time Gandhi had ever taken part in an organization, learning how to run a group, writing for its newsletter, and standing up to speak in front of others. It was also the first time in his life he did not feel out of place, because the people around him believed what he believed, even though they were English and he was Indian. In 1891, Gandhi completed his law degree and returned to India, but the homecoming was not the gentle one he had hoped for. His mother had died while he was studying in England, and the family had kept the news from him so it would not distract him from his studies. He walked back into his home to find no mother waiting to greet him. He then began practicing law in Bombay and failed almost immediately. On his very first case, he walked into the courtroom, looked at the judge and the lawyers on both sides, and found he could not open his mouth. He sat down, stood up again, then told his client he could not go on, and walked out. The timidity that had haunted him since childhood was still there, only now it wore the suit of a London-trained lawyer. He spent the following months living off his brother's money, taking on small jobs like drafting petitions for a fee. His life at that point showed little promise. Then, in 1893, an Indian Muslim merchant in South Africa named Dada Abdullah needed a young Indian lawyer to handle a commercial lawsuit. The job would last only a year. The pay was enough to live on, nothing more. Gandhi took it. He thought he would go for a year and then come home. He would stay for 21 years. And when he finally returned to India, he would no longer be the man who had left. Chapter 2. The Night Train at Pietermaritzburg. In April 1893, Gandhi set foot in the port of Durban, South Africa, for the first time in his life. He wore a three-piece suit in the English style, a white turban in the style of a Gujarati Indian, and carried a small suitcase holding his clothes and his law books. He was 23 years old, had never won a single case, and knew nothing about the land he had just arrived in beyond the name on a one-year contract. Dada Abdullah, the man who had hired him, was a wealthy Indian Muslim merchant caught up in a large commercial lawsuit involving a debt of more than 40,000 pounds owed by his own cousin. Gandhi's job was to help make sense of the legal documents and translate correspondence. It was not glamorous work, but it was enough to live on and enough to leave behind the failed months in Bombay. In his first days in Durban, Dada Abdullah took Gandhi to meet the local Indian community and introduced him to business associates. At one court session he attended as an observer, the English judge ordered Gandhi to remove his turban. This was an unwritten rule in the Natal courts applied to people of color. Gandhi refused and walked out of the courtroom. It was the first time he had disobeyed an order from an Englishman, even a small one. He would later write that in that moment he had not known exactly what he was doing, only that it felt wrong and that he could not have done otherwise. But the moment that would truly change Gandhi had not yet come. It was waiting for him on a train. A few weeks after arriving in South Africa, Gandhi needed to travel to Pretoria to meet the opposing lawyers in Dada Abdullah's case. Dada Abdullah bought him a first-class ticket, since that was the fitting way for an educated Indian lawyer to travel. Gandhi boarded the train in Durban on the afternoon of June 7, 1893, found his first-class compartment, placed his luggage on the rack, and sat down. The train had traveled only a short distance when it reached Pietermaritzburg station, the second largest city in Natal province. Evening was setting in. An English passenger stepped into the compartment, looked at Gandhi, and turned to call a railway official. A short while later, an official came in and told Gandhi to move to the third-class car, the one reserved for people of color. Gandhi produced his first-class ticket. The official said that a first-class ticket made no difference. A person of color was not permitted to sit in the same compartment as English passengers. Gandhi refused to move. A little later, a police constable entered. He did not argue or explain further. He put a hand on Gandhi's shoulder and pulled him out of the compartment. Gandhi's luggage was thrown onto the platform. The train pulled away into the night without him. Gandhi stood alone on the platform at Pietermaritzburg in the winter darkness of a South African June. A cold wind blew down from the direction of the Drakensberg Mountains. His coat was inside the suitcase that had been thrown off, but the case had been held by the railway staff, and he could not retrieve it in the dark. He went into the waiting room, sat down in the shadows, and drew himself in against the cold, and he began to think. The first question that came to him was the most practical one. Should he simply take the next train back to Durban and from there sail home to India? He owed South Africa nothing. He was only a young lawyer here to do a job with an end date. No one would have blamed him for giving up. But sitting there in the cold night, he began to think further. If he went home, what would actually change? Nothing at all. Another train would come, another Indian would be thrown out of a first-class compartment, and no one would remember this night. But if he stayed, at least he would come to understand what he was truly up against. The next morning, Gandhi sent a telegram to Dada Abdullah describing what had happened, then sent another to the general manager of the railway, formally protesting the incident in writing. He continued on to Pretoria on a later train, but this time he carried something with him that he had not had before boarding in Durban. He had begun to want to understand this land, and the land was anything but simple. South Africa, at the close of the 19th century, was a society built on rigid layers of division. At the top stood white people of English and Boer descent, the Boers being the long-settled Dutch colonists. Beneath them were Indians, most of whom had been brought over starting in the 1860s as indentured laborers to work the sugar plantations of Natal. Below them still, at the very bottom of the entire system, were the native Zulu people and other African peoples. By the time Gandhi arrived, there were roughly 100,000 Indians in South Africa. A few, like Dada Abdullah, were wealthy, independent merchants, but most were laborers whose indenture contracts had expired and who had simply stayed on, having no money to return home. They were called coolies, a slur used for cheap, non-white labor. In some cities, they were forbidden from walking on the sidewalks. They could not go outdoors after 9 at night without a permit. They could not vote. They were taxed specially if they refused to renew their labor contracts after the first term expired. Wealthy Indians like Dada Abdullah escaped many of these restrictions through money and connections, but they could not escape the contempt woven into every regulation, every glance, every time they were called coolie instead of their own name. Gandhi came to understand all of this gradually. During the months he spent in Pretoria working on Dada Abdullah's case, he met with the local Indian community there, listened to their stories, read the local newspapers, and slowly built in his mind a fuller picture of what was happening to the hundreds of thousands of his countrymen on this land. Dada Abdullah's case was resolved in early 1894. Gandhi prepared to buy a ticket home to India. Dada Abdullah threw him a farewell party, inviting the whole Indian community of Durban. At that party, someone handed Gandhi a newspaper. The paper reported on a bill before the Natal Parliament that would strip Indians in the province of the right to vote. It was not a sweeping right to begin with, only the local franchise held by a small number of Indians with high enough income to qualify. But if the bill passed, even that small right would be wiped out entirely. The people at the party turned to Gandhi and asked if he could stay one more month to help the community draft a petition against the bill. He was the only one among them with a law degree from England, the only one who could write in English well enough to reach the ears of those in power. Gandhi sat quietly for a moment, then said he would stay. That 1 month stretched into many months, and then into years. Over the following weeks, Gandhi organized the Indian community to gather signatures for the petition. They collected more than 10,000, an enormous number for such a small community. The petition was sent to the Natal Parliament, to the British Colonial Secretary in London, and to the press. The British newspapers covered it. The bill passed regardless, but for the first time, the Indian community saw that they could raise their voice and that the outside world could hear it. In 1894, Gandhi founded the Natal Indian Congress, the first political organization of the Indian community in South Africa. He served as its secretary, drafted its documents, met with officials, and wrote letters to the press all at once. He was, in the most conventional sense, a political activist, a man who believed that if he presented reasonable arguments with enough patience and enough civility, the English would listen and make things right. He still believed in the fairness of the British Empire. He still considered himself a loyal subject of that empire. That belief would last a good many more years before reality shattered it completely. In 1896, Gandhi returned to India to bring his wife and children back with him to South Africa. While there, he gave speeches in many places about the condition of Indians in South Africa and wrote a small green pamphlet describing the discrimination the community was enduring. The British press summarized this pamphlet in a distorted way, leaving readers in South Africa with the impression that Gandhi had attacked white South Africans far more harshly than what he had actually written. When the ship carrying Gandhi and his family docked at Durban in January 1897, a crowd of white residents had already gathered at the port. They had read those newspaper accounts and were furious. The ship was held offshore for several days on the pretext of quarantine, though everyone understood the real reason. When Gandhi finally came ashore alone, the crowd recognized him and closed in. People threw stones and rotten lemons at his head. People kicked him and punched him. He was knocked down, got back up, was struck again, and tried to keep walking. He escaped only because the wife of the Durban police superintendent happened to be passing by and shielded him, placing herself between him and the crowd until the police arrived to disperse it. When asked afterward whether he wanted to press charges against his attackers, Gandhi refused. He said he did not wish to see any of them harmed, and that he did not believe jailing them would solve anything. The Durban police superintendent was so startled he did not know what to say. The British press covered the incident, and most of the coverage sided with Gandhi, since the story was so plain. An educated Indian lawyer, guilty of nothing, beaten by a mob in the street. Gandhi suddenly became a known name in England, though it was never something he had sought. In the years that followed, Gandhi practiced law while continuing his work for the Natal Indian Congress. Family life grew steadier once Kasturba and the children had joined him. But within him, larger questions were beginning to take shape about the relationship between the individual and the power of an unjust system. Then, in 1899, the Boer War broke out between the British Empire and the two Boer republics in the north of South Africa. Gandhi faced a difficult decision. He did not support the war, but he still believed that being a subject of the British Empire meant sharing both its burdens and its benefits. He reasoned that if Indians proved their loyalty to the empire in a time of hardship, the empire could no longer go on denying them their rights. He organized an ambulance corps of more than 1,100 Indian volunteers and personally led them to the front. His unit carried stretchers under gunfire, dressed wounds, and transported the injured from the battlefield to medical stations. It was dangerous work, and Gandhi did it unarmed. Britain took notice and awarded him and many members of his unit the South African War Medal. But when the war ended and Gandhi waited for some change in policy toward Indians, nothing came. The Boers had lost the war, but the discriminatory laws against Indians remained exactly as they were, and in some places grew even stricter, once the two Boer territories were absorbed into the British Empire. Gandhi began to understand that loyalty was not something that could be traded for rights from an empire, but he did not yet know what to replace it with. The answer came in 1906 in the form of a law with the official name of the Asiatic Law Amendment Act, though Indians in Transvaal called it by a shorter and far more bitter name, the Black Act. The law required every Indian in Transvaal aged 8 or older to register with the police, submit fingerprints of all 10 fingers, and carry a certificate at all times. Anyone unable to produce it when asked by police would be arrested, fined, or deported. The system was identical to how criminals or people under state surveillance were tracked, and it applied to the entire Indian community regardless of who they were. On September 11, 1906, more than 3,000 Indians gathered at the Empire Theatre in Johannesburg. The mood in the hall was heavy and angry. Many spoke of resisting by force. Many others spoke of simply leaving the country for good. Gandhi rose to speak. He proposed a different path. Do not comply with the law. Do not register. Do not carry the papers. Accept arrest. Accept fines. Accept prison. But do not submit. And absolutely no violence, because violence would give the oppressor a reason to crack down, while non-violence would give them no such reason. He called this method Satyagraha, a word he coined himself from Sanskrit. Satya means truth. Agraha means firmness, a tight grip. Satyagraha is the strength of truth, unyielding and non-violent persistence in pursuit of what is right. The hall fell silent. Then they voted unanimously to agree. The night train at Pietermaritzburg, the night Gandhi sat huddled in the cold waiting room of a small station, had traveled a distance of 13 years to arrive at this moment. 3,000 men standing up and deciding they would no longer be afraid. And the man who had led them to that decision was the same man who, once, had been too frightened to even question a witness in a courtroom. Chapter 3. The Flame of Satyagraha. On August 16, 1908, in the square in front of the Hamidiya Mosque in Johannesburg, a large cast-iron pot was set down in the middle of the courtyard. Hundreds of Indians came forward one by one, pulled the fingerprint registration certificates the Transvaal government had issued them out of their pockets, and threw them into the pot. Once it was full, someone lit a fire. The papers began to burn, and black smoke rose to the sky. This was the first mass burning of identity papers in the history of civil rights movements anywhere in the world, taking place more than 50 years before Vietnam War protesters would burn draft cards on the streets of America. The people standing around that iron pot that day had no idea they were creating an image history would remember forever. They only knew they did not want to be afraid anymore. But to understand why that fire was lit, the story has to go back to the beginning. After the historic meeting of September 1906, Gandhi and the Indian community of Transvaal began organizing resistance. They did not go to register. They did not carry the certificates. They went on living and working as though the Black Act did not exist. The Transvaal authorities began arresting those without certificates and deporting them from the province. Gandhi himself was arrested for the first time in January 1908. He was brought before the court and sentenced to 2 months in prison or a fine of £50. He chose prison. He entered his cell with a book and a notebook, showing no sign of worry or anger. This unsettled the jailers more than any act of open defiance could have. General John Smuts head of the Transvaal government, found himself facing a problem he did not know how to solve. Here was a man perfectly willing to sit calmly in prison, and every time he was arrested, the Indian community only grew more unified. Smuts decided to try negotiation. He sent word for Gandhi to come meet him and proposed a deal. If Indians registered voluntarily, not under compulsion of law, but of their own free will, the government would repeal the coercive act. Gandhi took Smuts at his word. He urged the community to register voluntarily as a gesture of good faith, but not everyone trusted the plan. A large Pathan man named Mir Alam, once a client of Gandhi's, saw registration as a betrayal. On the day Gandhi went to the registration office, Mir Alam and several others blocked his way and beat him unconscious right there in the street. Gandhi came to in the arms of an English friend, murmuring the name of God in Hindi. He recovered. He did not press charges against Mir Alam, and he still went to register, his face still bruised. Smuts did not keep his word. The act was not repealed. The verbal agreement was never honored. Gandhi understood he had been deceived, and he said so publicly, plainly, without softening it. That is why the iron pot appeared in August 1908. The very certificates they had submitted their fingerprints to obtain were now being burned. It was their way of declaring that no deal existed and that the resistance would go on. Gandhi was arrested many more times in the years that followed. He grew accustomed to walking into a cell the way one walks into a familiar room. He brought the Bhagavad Gita with him, along with the writings of Tolstoy and John Ruskin, thinkers whose ideas had shaped his own philosophy. In prison, he made sandals by hand to keep himself occupied and his mind calm. He sent a pair of those sandals to General Smuts. Smuts kept them, wore them for years, and later said he always felt a certain unease whenever he put them on. Not because they were poorly made, but because he knew who had made them and under what circumstances. It was a form of resistance no military manual had ever taught anyone how to answer. During his years in South Africa, Gandhi did not fight only through petitions and prison terms. He also built communities that lived according to the philosophy he believed in. In 1904, after reading John Ruskin's book, Unto This Last, during a long train journey, Gandhi decided on the spot to found a new settlement built on the principles in that book. He named it Phoenix Farm, located about 20 kilometers from Durban. There, people lived and worked together, grew their own vegetables, repaired their own homes, with no distinction drawn between manual labor and intellectual work. Even the lawyer had to go out and till the soil like everyone else. In 1910, he founded a second settlement, Tolstoy Farm, near Johannesburg, named after the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy, with whom he was corresponding at the time. Tolstoy was then over 80 and living out his final years in Russia, but he and Gandhi never once met in person. They knew each other only through letters, and in those letters, two men on opposite ends of the world discovered they were asking the same question. How does a person live true to conscience in a world full of injustice? Tolstoy died in November 1910, before he and Gandhi ever had the chance to meet. Gandhi kept a photograph of Tolstoy on his desk for the rest of his life. These farms were not merely places to live. They were laboratories where Gandhi tested and refined his ideas before carrying them out on a larger scale. Simple living, self-sufficiency, no distinction of caste or religion, manual labor accepted as a necessary part of a life lived with dignity. These were not things he merely spoke of. He lived them day by day. And during those years, a large conflict broke out that pulled Gandhi into a role he had not expected. In 1906, the Zulu people of Natal rose up against a new poll tax imposed by the British administration. The uprising was crushed quickly and brutally. Thousands of Zulu were killed or captured. Gandhi again faced a difficult question. Should he organize an ambulance corps to support the British forces, even though he did not approve of how the British were treating the Zulu? He decided to go, but this time with a different intention. His ambulance corps refused to care only for wounded British soldiers. They also treated wounded Zulu, men the British Medical Corps had left unattended because they were considered the enemy. Gandhi personally dressed the wounds of Zulu men, looked into their eyes, and understood that the same system pressing down on Indians was pressing down on them too, only far more heavily. The weeks marching through the hills and forests of Natal with that ambulance corps gave Gandhi more time to think than almost any period in his life. He thought about the violence he witnessed, about the senselessness of the deaths around him, and he asked himself what more he could accomplish if he were not bound by personal desires and ambitions. When he returned, he told Kasturba that he would live in complete celibacy from that point on. He called this brahmacharya, total restraint, not only of the body but of the mind as well. He believed the energy of that restraint would feed the spiritual strength he would need for the long struggle ahead. Kasturba was not pleased with the decision, but she accepted it, as she had accepted many other difficult things over the course of their long and complicated marriage. The years from 1908 to 1913 were long, exhausting years of Satyagraha in South Africa. Not every day brought a burning pot or a great demonstration. Most of the time consisted of the ordinary work of organizing, persuading, writing, and waiting. Many people grew tired and gave up along the way. More than once the movement seemed on the verge of falling apart. Gandhi held it all together, not through stirring speeches but through his own personal steadiness. He never promised a quick victory. He only said that if they refused to bend, the oppressor would eventually grow weary first. Then, in 1913, a court ruling struck the spark Gandhi had been waiting for longer than he expected. South Africa's Supreme Court ruled that only marriages performed under Christian rites held legal standing. This meant that all Hindu and Muslim marriages, meaning the marriages of most Indians in South Africa, were not recognized by law. Indian wives, legally speaking, were not valid wives. Their children, legally speaking, were not legitimate children. The news spread through the Indian community like fire through dry brush. This time, it was not only the men in political councils who grew angry. Wives, mothers, women who had never once taken part in political activity took to the streets as well. Gandhi recognized this as the moment to push the movement to a new height. He called on the women of Phoenix Farm and Tolstoy Farm to cross from Transvaal into Natal without permits, an act that violated immigration law. These women, many of whom had never traveled far from home, crossed the border and turned themselves in to the police. They were arrested and sentenced to 3 months of hard labor in the coal mines. News of the imprisoned women reached more than 2,000 Indian coal miners in Newcastle, Natal. They went on strike immediately, laying down their picks and refusing to go underground. The mine owners cut off their electricity and water and evicted them from the housing tied to their labor contracts. Gandhi arrived in Newcastle and stood before more than 2,000 miners with no homes, no electricity, no water, and no idea where they would sleep that night. He made them no specific promises. He only said that he would walk with them and that they would walk together. On November 6, 1913, Gandhi led a column of people setting out from Newcastle toward the Transvaal border, more than 200 kilometers away. It was the largest march Satyagraha had ever organized, and it had no vehicles, no tents, no stored provisions. The workers and their families walked under the daytime sun and slept in the open at night, eating whatever food people along the road brought out to them. Gandhi was arrested 3 times within a single week. Each time he was taken, his assistants kept the column moving. Each time he was released and then arrested again. The number of people in the march grew larger as word spread and people from other areas came to join. The international press arrived to cover it. Images of thousands of Indians walking across the parched land of South Africa while their leader was arrested again and again appeared in newspapers, in London, in India, across Europe. The British colonial government in India sent telegrams to London expressing concern. International pressure began bearing down on the South African government. General Smuts understood he could no longer stand aside. He needed a settlement. This time, Gandhi would not trust Smuts's word alone. He demanded that everything be put in writing and passed by Parliament. After months of negotiation, the Smuts-Gandhi Agreement was signed in June 1914. Under its terms, the £3 tax imposed on Indian laborers whose contracts had expired was abolished. Hindu and Muslim marriages were legally recognized, and Indians who had been unlawfully deported were allowed to return. It was not a complete victory. Countless injustices remained. Indians in South Africa still had no right to vote, were still barred from living in many areas reserved for whites, and were still treated as second-class residents in many aspects of daily life. Gandhi knew this and said plainly that the agreement was only a small step on a very long road. But more important than any specific clause in the agreement was what had been proven. A community with no army, no weapons, and no political power had forced a government to change its laws simply by refusing to be afraid and accepting whatever consequences came from that refusal. Satyagraha was no longer theory. It had been tested in practice through prison cells, through feet aching on dusty roads, through nights spent sleeping under open sky, and it had not failed. In July 1914, Gandhi boarded a ship leaving South Africa. He was 45, his hair thinning and beginning to gray, far thinner than the 23-year-old who had stepped off a boat at Durban 21 years before. He carried little luggage, but he carried with him something that fit in no suitcase, a method of struggle that had already proven itself to work. As the ship pulled out of the harbor, word reached Smuts that Gandhi had gone. He breathed a sigh of relief. He told those around him that Gandhi had finally left, and that this was good for South Africa. He did not know that Gandhi was not leaving to rest. He was returning to do the same thing again, but this time on a land many times larger than South Africa, with a population many times greater. And the one he would face this time would not be Smuts, but an entire empire at the height of its power. India was waiting for Gandhi to come home, and Gandhi was ready. Chapter 4. The Stranger Who Came Home. In January 1915, the ship carrying Gandhi docked at Bombay. The crowd waiting at the harbor was not enormous, but it was large enough to show that the name Gandhi had arrived before he had. Newspaper reports from South Africa, telegrams about the Newcastle March, News of the Smuts-Gandhi Agreement had already reached India through the English and Gujarati press. People knew that an Indian lawyer in South Africa had done something unprecedented, that he had forced a colonial government to change its laws without firing a single shot. But the most important person waiting for Gandhi that day was not the crowd on the dock. It was Gopal Krishna Gokhale, one of the most respected leaders of the Indian nationalist movement at the time. Gokhale had followed Gandhi's work from afar for years and had publicly called him a source of pride for India. He greeted Gandhi the way a teacher greets a student, even though Gandhi had never formally studied under him. Gokhale said one thing to Gandhi that he would remember for the rest of his life: go across India, travel everywhere, listen, and do not speak publicly on politics for the first year. Gandhi followed his mentor's advice exactly, not because he had no opinions of his own, but because he was wise enough to understand that South Africa was not India. He had fought in South Africa on behalf of a community of a few 100,000 people, in circumstances he had come to understand thoroughly over 21 years. India was something else entirely. India held 300 million people, dozens of languages, hundreds of castes, many religions, and a relationship with the British far more complicated than anything he had faced at the southern tip of Africa. He bought a third-class train ticket and began to travel. Third class on an Indian train in 1915 was an entirely different world from first class. The carriages were packed, with not enough seats for everyone, no fans, no windows wide enough to let in air. The smells of sweat, of food, of people who had been traveling for days blended into one heavy atmosphere. People slept on the floor, on their luggage, wedged into every last centimeter of open space. Gandhi sat among them and watched. He watched an old farmer holding a chicken in his lap because there was no room to store it. He watched a young mother nursing her child in the corner of the carriage, surrounded by dozens of strangers. He watched a coal miner with hands blackened by coal dust, dozing with his head against the shoulder of a stranger, neither of them knowing the other's name. This was the real India, not the India found in the velvet-upholstered meeting rooms of the elite in Bombay or Calcutta. He traveled like this for months, from one province to the next, from the plains of the Ganges down to the southern coast, from cities dominated by looming British buildings to red earth villages that had never seen a European face. He listened far more than he spoke. He asked far more than he explained. And what he saw troubled him in a way quite different from anything he had felt in South Africa. India in 1915 was being slowly and systematically uprooted from itself. 200 years under the British Empire had turned a once self-sufficient civilization into a machine for exporting raw materials. Cotton grown in Indian fields was bought up cheaply, shipped to Lancashire and Manchester to be woven into cloth, then shipped back and sold to Indians at many times the price. India's handloom weavers, once one of the most prosperous trades on the subcontinent for centuries, went bankrupt en masse, unable to compete with cloth produced by British industrial machinery. In the deeper countryside, conditions were even worse. Farmers were forced to grow export crops instead of food crops. When harvests failed or market prices dropped, they had nothing to eat and no money to pay their taxes. The great famines that struck were not the result of India lacking land or lacking people who knew how to farm, but of a colonial economic system designed to make Indian land and Indian labor serve British pockets first. Gandhi saw all of this and understood that the struggle in India would not be only a struggle for political rights or personal dignity as it had been in South Africa. This was a struggle against an entire economic system exploiting hundreds of millions of people in an orderly way, shielded by law. In February 1915, Gokhale died of a heart condition. The mentor who had guided him home was gone only a month after Gandhi had set foot back in India. Gandhi stood beside Gokhale's body and realized that from then on, he was no longer an apprentice learning the trade. He would have to find his own path on this land. In 1915, Gandhi founded the Satyagraha Ashram near the city of Ahmedabad, on the banks of the Sabarmati River. He named it in keeping with his own philosophy. This was to be a place where Satyagraha was practiced in daily life, not only in political resistance. Those who lived in the ashram grew their own vegetables, wove their own cloth, harmed no animals, and observed no distinction of caste or religion among its members. That last rule triggered a crisis within the first few months. Gandhi decided to admit a Dalit family into the ashram, people traditional Hindu society labeled untouchable, excluded from the caste system, and considered so impure that merely having their shadow fall on someone of higher caste was thought to defile that person. The families funding the ashram immediately withdrew their support. Gandhi's own wife, Kasturba, objected at first as well, having grown up believing that Dalits truly were impure in a spiritual sense. Gandhi would not budge. He told Kasturba that if she could not accept this, he would leave the ashram himself. Kasturba thought it over for several days and then changed her mind. The Dalit family stayed. The old donors left, but new ones came forward to take their place once word of what had happened spread. During that quiet first year, Gandhi traveled, listened, and thought. But quiet did not mean standing entirely still. He observed closely how the British ran India and how the Indian elite within the Indian National Congress operated, and he recognized a serious problem. The Indian National Congress, the largest political organization of the nationalist movement, was largely the playground of the urban intellectual and professional class. They wore suits, spoke fluent English, met in elegant conference rooms, and debated constitutions, self-rule, and lofty political concepts. Meanwhile, farmers in Bihar did not have enough rice to get through the day. Gandhi did not dismiss the importance of those political debates, but he understood that a country could not be liberated if the very people most in need of liberation had no idea that liberation was even underway. Then, in 1917, a lawyer named Raj Kumar Shukla came to see Gandhi at Lucknow during a session of the Indian National Congress. Shukla was a farmer from the Champaran region of Bihar, dressed plainly, speaking no English, and he clung to Gandhi and would not leave. He kept repeating the same request: "Please come to Champaran and see for yourself how the farmers there are living." Gandhi was busy at first and asked for more time. Shukla waited patiently. He followed Gandhi from Lucknow to Calcutta, slept outside the house where Gandhi was staying, and appeared each morning to repeat his invitation. After weeks of this, Gandhi looked at this patient man and said yes, he would come to Champaran. Champaran was an indigo-growing region in northern Bihar, bordering Nepal. For generations, farmers there had been forced to devote a third of their land to growing indigo under a system called Tinkatiya. The indigo was harvested and sold to British plantation owners at whatever price the owners themselves set, not according to any market rate. The farmers had no right to refuse and no right to negotiate. When Gandhi arrived in Champaran and began traveling from village to village to hear the farmers' stories, what he witnessed was heavier than anything he had imagined. The farmers there were so poor that many did not have enough cloth to clothe themselves. Women dared not leave their homes because they lacked enough clothing to cover themselves. Children did not go to school because their families needed them at home to work. Debts passed from father to son, from one generation to the next, never paid off because the interest always grew faster than the borrower's ability to repay. When the Bihar provincial government heard that Gandhi was conducting an investigation, they ordered him to leave the province immediately. Gandhi received the order, read it carefully, and wrote back that he could not comply because he had not yet finished the work he had come to do, and that he was prepared to accept whatever legal consequences followed. This was the first time Gandhi applied Satyagraha on Indian soil. He was summoned to court. Word spread, and thousands of Champaran farmers gathered outside the courthouse, not to cause trouble, but simply to stand there. They stood in silence, looking at the courthouse with eyes that had never once dared look directly at someone in power. The British official looked out the window and saw thousands of people. He did not know what to do. In the end, the case was dropped. There was no verdict, no ruling, because the court realized that convicting Gandhi would only make matters worse. Gandhi stayed in Champaran and continued his investigation. He brought in fellow lawyers and university students, sent them out to villages, and had them record each farmer's testimony carefully, as though this were the most important case before the highest court in the world. Thousands of testimonies were recorded, thousands of stories about land seized, money taken, men beaten for failing to meet their indigo quotas piled up into a thick file. The colonial Indian government, faced with this undeniable mass of documentation and mounting public pressure, opened an official inquiry and invited Gandhi to serve as a member of the committee. The inquiry's findings led to the abolition of the Tinkathia system, compensation returned to the farmers, and the cancellation of unlawful debts. The farmers of Champaran could hardly believe it. They had lived under that system for generations, had come to see it as unchangeable like the weather or the seasonal flooding of the Ganges. And then a small man in coarse cloth came and wrote down what they told him, and the system collapsed. News of Champaran spread across India. The name Gandhi began to mean something different than before, no longer simply the name of a lawyer from South Africa, but the name of someone who could go where no one else went and accomplish what no one thought possible. In 1918, Gandhi pursued two struggles at once. In Ahmedabad, he helped textile mill workers organize a strike demanding higher wages, and this was the first time he fasted to apply pressure in a labor dispute. In Kedah, in Gujarat, he organized farmers to refuse to pay taxes during a year of failed harvests, a campaign that lasted several months before the authorities finally agreed to suspend tax collection. Wherever he went, he did not only lead people into struggle, he also did smaller things no one else thought to do. He set up schools for children in the villages. He organized cleanup efforts in places where people had grown so used to filth that they no longer recognized it as filth. He spoke with women about health and hygiene, while the men attended political meetings. He believed that dignity was not something that arrived only after independence was won, but something that had to be practiced now in every small act of daily life. Then, in April 1919, news from a city in Punjab in northern India reached Gandhi like a thunderclap. But before that, a law had been passed that Gandhi had already warned was unacceptable. The Rowlatt Act, passed in March 1919, allowed the British administration to imprison any Indian suspected of political activity without trial, holding them indefinitely with no court ruling required. It was a wartime law kept in place after the First World War had ended, and it stated plainly something the British administration usually tried to hide behind flowery talk of civilization and rule of law, that Indians did not hold the basic rights the British considered self-evident for themselves. Gandhi called for a nationwide strike on April 6, 1919. All Indians to stop work, close their shops, and gather together in prayer for a single day. It was the first time in Indian history that a national political action had been called for by someone holding no official position at all. And it happened everywhere. From the largest cities to the smallest towns, shops closed, streets fell quiet, and people gathered to pray in silence. But in some places, the calm did not last. In Delhi, in Ahmedabad, and in Amritsar in Punjab, peaceful demonstrations turned violent once police intervened. Government buildings were burned, and Englishmen were attacked. Gandhi called off the campaign once he realized that many participants did not yet understand and were not yet ready for the principle of nonviolence. He called his own decision a serious blunder, having launched a nationwide action before people were properly prepared. But in Amritsar, the worst of it did not come from the side of the protesters. On April 13, 1919, tens of thousands of people gathered in a walled garden called Jallianwala Bagh to celebrate the Baisakhi festival and hear speakers address the political situation. The entrance to the garden was narrow and nearly sealed off by high walls. People had come there for no disorderly purpose, and many did not even know about the ban on gatherings the British had just issued, since the news had not yet reached the outlying villages. General Reginald Dyer led 90 soldiers into the garden, had them form a line, and ordered them to fire directly into the crowd with no warning given, no order to disperse, and no shots fired into the air first. 1,650 rounds were fired within 10 minutes. People tried to flee, but there was no way out, hemmed in by the surrounding walls. Those not struck by bullets were crushed in the stampede, or jumped into the garden's well to escape the gunfire and drowned there instead. When the shooting stopped, at least 379 people were dead, though many sources estimate the true number was far higher, and thousands more lay wounded on the ground. Dyer did not allow anyone into the garden to help the wounded for several hours afterward. Gandhi read those numbers in his study and sat in silence for a long while. He had believed in the fairness of the British Empire for 30 years. He had organized an ambulance corps for the British Army during the Boer War. He had believed that if Indians proved themselves loyal enough, civilized enough by British standards, the Empire would eventually grant them the rights owed to human beings. Jallianwala Bagh told him there was no fairness there to believe in, not because the British were more wicked than any other empire in history, but because this was simply the nature of imperialism itself. It could never grant equal rights to the ruled, because doing so would be to deny the very reason for its own existence. It had taken him 30 years to understand that, but from that day forward, he never forgot it again. Chapter 5. enemy of the empire. After Jallianwala Bagh, Gandhi did not rage the way people usually rage. He did not call for revenge. He did not call for people to take to the streets in destruction. He sat down and thought for a long while, and then did something few had expected. He returned every medal and decoration the British Empire had ever awarded him during his years in South Africa, along with a letter to the Viceroy of India explaining his reasons in full. The letter was less than a page long, but it stated plainly something Gandhi could not have said 30 years earlier, that he no longer believed he could remain a loyal subject of an empire capable of behaving the way it had just behaved at Amritsar. That was the moment Gandhi formally became an enemy of the British Empire, not because he chose hostility, but because he chose truth. In 1920, Gandhi proposed to the Indian National Congress an entirely new strategy he called the non-cooperation movement. Its core idea was simple enough to sound almost strange. If Indians stopped cooperating with the machinery of British rule, that machinery could no longer function. No Indians serving as clerks in colonial offices, no Indian lawyers practicing in British courts, no Indian students attending British-run schools, no Indian consumers buying goods imported from Britain, and the empire's vast machine would slowly starve for lack of fuel. This was something without precedent in the history of liberation struggles, not a violent revolution in the French style, not parliamentary-style diplomatic negotiation. This was an organized withdrawal from the entire system the occupier had built, a silent siege from within. The Congress voted to adopt the proposal, though not every leader was fully convinced. Many were British-trained lawyers living the comfortable life of the urban middle class, not people who gave such things up easily. But Gandhi's standing after Champaran and Kheda was strong enough that the skeptics set their doubts aside, at least for the time being. What happened in the months that followed was something no one in the Congress meeting hall could have predicted. The non-cooperation movement did not stay confined to the urban elite. It reached down into remote villages where no one had ever imagined the people there cared about politics at all. Thousands of lawyers closed their offices. Thousands of students left British schools. Millions of meters of cloth imported from Lancashire were gathered up and burned in great bonfires in city squares. Indian civil servants declined promotions or resigned from posts within the colonial administration, and the hand-spinning wheel became the symbol of all of it. Gandhi had begun spinning and weaving his own cloth years earlier, but in 1920 he turned that personal habit into a nationwide call. He asked every Indian to spend at least 1 hour a day spinning by hand, weaving their own cloth, and refusing to buy cloth imported from Britain. The spinning wheel, called the charkha in Sanskrit, became an object found in every household that joined the movement. The clattering sound of millions of spinning wheels turning at once across India was one of the strangest sounds history has ever recorded. Some asked Gandhi why he placed such weight on so simple a craft object, while larger political questions were waiting to be settled. He answered that Indians could not demand self-rule while still wearing cloth woven by the British, from cotton grown by Indians. Economic dependence and political dependence were two faces of the same thing. Anyone who truly wanted freedom had to begin by making their own clothes. He also changed his own dress completely during this period. He gave up the clothing of the Gujarati middle class entirely and wore only a coarse white homespun cloth wrapped around his waist, no shirt, and sandals he had woven himself. This was the dress of India's poorest farmers. He wanted no distance at all between his own appearance and that of the poorest people he was fighting for. Winston Churchill, on seeing images of Gandhi dressed this way, called him a seditious fakir and said it was shameful to watch this half-naked man walk into the Viceroy's palace to negotiate as though he were an equal to any statesman. Churchill despised Gandhi with a remarkable consistency across 3 decades, and that hatred showed just how clearly Churchill understood how dangerous Gandhi was to everything Churchill held dear. While the non-cooperation movement spread, Gandhi put special effort into building unity between Hindus and Muslims. He considered this the very foundation on which any struggle for liberation in India would have to stand, since a country divided against itself from within could never be strong enough to stand up to an empire from without. He joined the Khilafat movement of Indian Muslims, which was fighting to protect the position of the Islamic Caliphate in Turkey after the First World War, as a way of telling Indian Muslims that their struggle and the struggle of Hindus were one and the same. This was not something everyone accepted easily. Many conservative Hindus disliked seeing Gandhi stand alongside Muslim leaders. Many Muslims doubted that a devout Hindu like Gandhi could truly understand their interests. But Gandhi persisted, believing that doubt could only be dissolved through action, not through words. The movement kept growing, its echo growing louder, until February 5, 1922, in a small village called Chauri Chaura in Gorakhpur province, everything suddenly stopped. That day, a crowd of non-cooperation demonstrators passing through the village clashed with local police. The police fired into the crowd, killing several people. The crowd's anger boiled over into violence, and they chased the police into their station. When the police retreated inside and barred the doors, the crowd set the station on fire. 22 policemen died in that fire, most of them ordinary Indians who had taken jobs in the colonial administration simply to make a living. When word of Chauri Chaura reached Gandhi, he sat in silence for several days. Then he announced that he was halting the entire non-cooperation movement across the whole country, immediately, with no room for negotiation. The reaction from those working alongside him was fiercer than anything he had faced in any internal debate before. Jawaharlal Nehru, 20 years younger than Gandhi, and by then becoming one of the movement's most important leaders, said the decision was like calling off a major battle because one soldier had lost his composure. Other leaders argued that the movement was at its peak, that British rule was visibly shaking, and that this was the moment to press forward, not retreat. Gandhi did not change his mind. He said that a movement built on the principle of nonviolence, one unable to hold to that principle under difficult circumstances, was not truly a nonviolent movement at all, only violence waiting for its moment. To continue after Chauri Chaura, in his view, would be to lie to themselves about the true nature of what they were building. He fasted for 5 days to punish himself for having launched a nationwide action before the people were adequately prepared for real nonviolence. In March 1922, the British arrested Gandhi on charges of sedition over articles he had written in his newspaper. His trial took place on March 18, 1922, in Ahmedabad, and Gandhi turned it into one of the most memorable moments of his life. Standing before the English judge, Gandhi did not deny the charges. He admitted that he had written those articles, that he had intended to incite the people to disobey colonial law, and that he was prepared to accept whatever punishment the court chose to impose. He said that, as a citizen of conscience, living under a system he considered unjust to its very roots, he had no choice but to refuse obedience to that system, and that this was what he would continue doing for as long as he was able. The judge, an Englishman named Broomfield, said he deeply regretted having to sentence a man who many of his contemporaries considered a great figure, but that the law left him no other course. He sentenced Gandhi to 6 years in prison and apologized before reading out the sentence. Gandhi nodded, thanked the judge for his courtesy, and walked into Yerwada prison in Pune as though he were entering an extended retreat rather than a jail. In prison, he read, wrote, and spun thread. His health declined rapidly under the conditions of confinement, and in January 1924, he had to undergo emergency appendix surgery right there in the prison. After the operation, the authorities, worried he might die in custody, decided to release him on health grounds, though he had served only 2 years of his 6-year sentence. The middle years of the 1920s were the slowest period of Gandhi's entire adult life. He recovered his health, wrote and read a great deal, and devoted much of his energy to what troubled him most deeply: the deepening rift between Hindus and Muslims. The Khilafat movement collapsed after Turkey abolished the caliphate itself in 1924, taking away the shared cause Gandhi and Muslim leaders had built together. Religious violence flared up across many parts of India. Hindus burned mosques, Muslims attacked Hindu temples. People who lived in the same village, drank from the same well, and traded in the same market suddenly found themselves killing one another over conflicts that none of them had started and none of them fully understood. Gandhi fasted for 21 days in 1924 to protest the religious violence and call for reconciliation. It was the longest fast of his life up to that point, and by the 15th day, doctors grew seriously concerned for his life. He drank salted lime water to survive and ate nothing else. By the time the fast ended, no one was certain he had truly changed anyone's mind. But for those days at least, all of India held its breath watching him, and no one dared stir up further trouble while the whole country's eyes were on him. In 1928 and 1929, the nationalist movement began stirring again. A new, younger generation of leaders was rising, hotter-tempered and less patient with Gandhi's measured strategy. Subhash Chandra Bose and others wanted armed struggle, wanted to challenge the British in the language of force rather than the language of conscience. Nehru stood somewhere in between, respecting Gandhi but not always agreeing with him. The Congress met at Lahore in December 1929 and passed the most consequential resolution in the organization's history. The goal was no longer self-rule or self-governance within the framework of the British Empire, but Purna Swaraj, complete independence. On January 26, 1930, at rallies held across India, millions of people read aloud a Declaration of Independence drafted by Gandhi, pledging not to rest until India was entirely free. Now a great act was needed to prove that the pledge was more than words. Gandhi sat thinking for weeks at the ashram on the banks of the Sabarmati. Those around him waited. Nehru and other leaders asked what he was planning. He gave no answer until he was ready. At last, he told them he would walk to the sea, and he would make salt. Many who heard this did not know how to respond. Salt? With India standing at the threshold of a historic revolution? He wanted to walk hundreds of kilometers to pick up salt from a beach, Gandhi explained. Salt was something every Indian needed, from the richest to the poorest, from Hindu to Muslim to Sikh to those of no religion at all. And the British held a monopoly on producing and selling salt, taxing it heavily, and forbidding Indians from gathering their own salt, even as they lived right beside the ocean. It was one of the most direct and concrete symbols of colonial domination, one every person could feel at every single meal. Striking at salt meant striking at everyone at once, leaving no one out, giving no one grounds to say this struggle had nothing to do with them. Besides, he added, the simplest act often says what the most elaborate argument cannot. No one could misunderstand what it meant when an old man bent down to pick up salt from the earth. It required no translation, no education, no ability to read or write to grasp the meaning of that act. On March 2, 1930, Gandhi sent a letter to Viceroy Lord Irwin, informing him of his plan politely and in full detail, including the date of departure and the route he would take. He invited the Viceroy to negotiate in order to avoid having to carry it out. He said he wished to cause no one difficulty, but had no other choice left to him. The Viceroy did not reply. 10 days later, early in the morning of March 12, 1930, Gandhi walked out through the gates of the Sabarmati ashram for the last time. He had told those at the ashram that he would not return until India was independent, or until he died along the way. At first, only 78 people walked with him. 78 people, a 61-year-old man with a bamboo staff, and 388 kilometers still ahead of him to the shore at Dandi. The British Empire looked on and did not yet understand what it was looking at, but it was about to find out. Chapter 6. The Salt March. On the morning of March 12, 1930, the sun had not yet fully risen when prayers began to sound from the Sabarmati ashram. Gandhi woke at 4 in the morning as he always did, bathed in cold water, meditated, and ate a simple breakfast. He put on his familiar coarse white cloth, laced up his hand-woven sandals, and picked up his bamboo staff, cut to fit his hand. He was 61 years old, weighed under 50 kilograms, and looked nothing like what anyone would imagine a man about to challenge an empire should look like. Thousands of people had gathered outside the ashram since the night before to see him off. Many wept. Many pushed forward just to touch him, once before he left. Kasturba stood at the ashram gate watching her husband go, saying nothing. They had lived together for 42 years, and she knew that no words were needed at that moment. Gandhi walked out through the gate at 6:30 in the morning, followed by a column of 78 people. They carried no weapons, no tents, little food. Each person had only the clothes on their back, a thin blanket, and enough food for the first few days. The Indian press covered it, though without yet grasping the true scale of what was beginning. The British press mostly treated it as the stunt of a stubborn old man. The Times of London wrote that the march was the act of someone out of touch with political reality. The British administration in Delhi decided not to arrest Gandhi right away, not wanting to turn him into a martyr, and partly because they genuinely did not believe the walk would lead to anything worth worrying about. It was the greatest mistake they could have made. The road from Sabarmati to Dandi ran through the villages of Gujarat, past cotton fields and mango groves, across dry season riverbeds and red earthen embankments. This was no smooth paved highway, but narrow dirt paths, dusty in the dry season and mired in mud during the rains. Under the March sun of Gujarat, daytime temperatures climbed past 35 degrees. Gandhi set a pace of roughly 18 to 20 kilometers a day, starting early each morning before the sun grew fierce and resting through the hottest hours of noon. He walked at a pace that people far younger than him had to strain to keep up with. Each evening, when the column stopped in a village, Gandhi held a joint prayer meeting and spoke with the local people. He did not speak only of salt or politics. He spoke of hygiene, of children's education, of giving up drink and gambling, of unity across caste and religion. He arrived in each village like an ordinary guest come to share a meal, not like a leader come to issue instructions. And something strange began to happen. After every village Gandhi passed through, the number of people walking with him grew. Farmers who heard the column was coming left their fields to stand and watch, then decided to join and walk along. Young people from nearby towns ran to catch up with the column. By the fifth day, the group was no longer 78 people. International reporters began to realize this was no stunt. They poured into Gujarat from everywhere. The American Wire Service Associated Press assigned a correspondent to follow the march the entire way. Major newspapers in Britain, the United States, France, and Germany began filing daily reports. Images of a thin, half-clothed man leaning on a bamboo staff, walking a dirt road followed by thousands, began appearing on front pages around the world. Americans read these stories over breakfast and felt they were witnessing something important, even though many of them could not have placed India on a map. The British administration grew anxious. They ordered local officials to keep villagers from coming out to greet Gandhi, threatening village headmen with punishment if they allowed their people to join. In some places, officials had the road torn up ahead of the march, scattering thorns and digging trenches to slow it down. In others, they cut off water supplies and forbade villagers from providing food to the marchers. None of these measures had much effect. Local people smuggled food and water to the marchers at night. Wherever the road had been damaged, people quietly repaired it before Gandhi arrived. In the village of Surat, the Indian village officials resigned en masse in protest of the British order, an act with no precedent before that. On April 5, 1930, after 24 days of walking, Gandhi and his column reached the village of Dandi on the shore of the Arabian Sea. The sea that day was blue and calm. The wind carried the smell of salt and seaweed. Thousands of people stood on the beach and on the higher ground looking down, so silent that the sound of waves breaking against the rocks could be heard clearly. Gandhi spent that night at Dandi. Early on the morning of April 6, 1930, he rose at 6, bathed in the sea, prayed, and then walked down to the low tide line where the retreating water had left a film of white salt on the damp ground. He bent down and picked up a handful of damp salt from the earth. It was an act that broke the law. Under the British Salt Act, Indians were forbidden from gathering or possessing natural salt without paying tax and obtaining a permit. Doing this in front of dozens of international reporters and thousands of witnesses was a fully deliberate public act of defiance against colonial law. Gandhi held up the handful of salt and said to those around him, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." No one laughed. No one took it as an exaggeration, because in that moment, everyone there could feel that he meant it exactly as he said it. And then, what Gandhi had hoped for happened, but on a scale even he had not fully anticipated. Across India, millions of people followed his lead. They poured onto beaches along India's coastline, stretching more than 7,000 kilometers. They went to riverbanks where natural salt deposits could be found. They boiled seawater in large pots, until it evaporated away and salt crystallized at the bottom. Housewives in small city kitchens made salt from purchased seawater as well. People sold homemade salt openly on the sidewalks, holding it up for the police to see. In Bombay, Sarojini Naidu, one of India's most celebrated poets and activists, organized thousands of people to make salt on Chowpatty Beach. The police stood watching but hesitated to arrest anyone, unsure how many people it would even take to make a dent in the crowd. In Madras, in Karachi, in Calcutta, the same scene repeated itself again and again. In the first weeks of April 1930, more than 60,000 people were arrested across India on charges connected to salt. The jails grew so overcrowded that the authorities no longer knew where to put anyone. British officials sent telegrams to London reporting the situation in tones of growing confusion, since there was no precedent for handling anything like it. Gandhi himself was arrested on the night of May 4th, 1930, while sleeping in a tent in the village of Karadi near Dandi. There was no formal charge, no trial. He was held under the very provision allowing detention without trial that he himself had opposed since 1919. They arrested him but did not know what to do with him next, since trying him in open court would only give him a stage to speak to the entire world. But the campaign did not stop because Gandhi had been arrested. Sarojini Naidu took over leadership and led a column to the Dharasana salt works, about 200 kilometers north of Bombay, where the British had stockpiled a large quantity of harvested salt. May 21st, 1930, at Dharasana, was the day the outside world truly understood what Satyagraha meant. Webb Miller, a correspondent for United Press International, an American, stood beside the scene and recorded everything he witnessed. His dispatch was later printed in more than 1,300 newspapers around the world and read aloud before the United States Senate. This is what Webb Miller saw. Thousands of Indian volunteers formed into small groups and advanced one after another toward the salt works, which were guarded by hundreds of Indian police under the command of British officers. As the first group neared the fence, police stepped forward and struck them on the head and shoulders with steel-shod clubs, without warning, without ordering them to stop. None of the volunteers raised their arms to block the blows. None of them ran. They simply fell. Those too badly hurt to stand were carried away by the women who accompanied the march as field medics. Others rose from where they had fallen, straightened their clothes, and kept walking forward. The second group advanced, was struck down, was carried out. The third group advanced. This went on for hours without stop. The police beat until their arms grew tired. Many volunteers suffered fractured skulls, broken shoulders, broken arms. Blood pooled on the ground. Not a single scream, not a single gesture of retaliation. Webb Miller wrote that in years of reporting from war fronts, he had never witnessed a scene that made him turn away and bow his head the way that one did. His report ran on front pages everywhere. In London, members of Parliament stood up to ask the Prime Minister whether this was how a civilized empire was meant to behave. In New York, people read the papers over breakfast and called their newsrooms asking for more details. In Berlin, in Paris, in Tokyo, the name Gandhi became the word people reached for whenever they wanted to describe a kind of courage they had not yet had a name for. And in the United States, in black communities across the South living under Jim Crow segregation, the reports from Dharasana were read and reread. Young ministers and civil rights activists clipped those articles, and kept them. 25 years later, a young American minister named Martin Luther King Jr. would stand at a pulpit in Montgomery, Alabama, and explain that his strategy traced back to an Indian man who had picked up salt from a beach. But in 1930, the story was not yet finished. The British administration came to understand that they were losing, not on any military or legal front, but on a front no army had ever been trained to fight on, the front of human conscience and international opinion. Every day the movement continued was another day the empire's image grew worse in the eyes of the world. In January 1931, Gandhi was released from prison. Viceroy Lord Irwin invited him to Delhi to negotiate. Those talks stretched over several days and led to the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, signed on March 5, 1931. Under its terms, the British released those arrested during the salt campaign, allowed coastal residents to gather salt for their own use, and the civil disobedience campaign was suspended. This was not independence. It was not a total victory. Many within the Congress criticized Gandhi for accepting too little after so much had been sacrificed. Subhash Chandra Bose called the pact a failure. Gandhi disagreed. He said that the most important outcome of the salt campaign was not found in the terms of the pact, but in what had happened inside the hearts of millions of Indians over those months. A people had learned that they did not have to be afraid. An empire had learned that it could not go on ruling forever by force of arms once the ruled no longer feared those arms. And the world had learned a new language, the language of non-violent resistance, one no military academy taught and no legal code could fully account for. That language would sound again in Montgomery in 1955, in Pretoria in 1964, in Gdansk in 1980, in Tiananmen Square in 1989, and in hundreds of other places around the world in the decades that followed throughout the rest of the 20th century. All of it began with a handful of salt on a Gujarat beach early in the morning of April 6, 1930. Chapter 7. Independence and the Wound. In August 1942, in the midst of the fiercest phase of the Second World War, Gandhi did something that many people, even those closest to him, considered bold to the point of recklessness. Japanese forces were sweeping through Southeast Asia like a flood. Singapore had fallen. Burma was lost. The sound of gunfire was drawing steadily closer to India's borders. The British Empire was fighting for its survival and needed India as a vast logistical base, needed Indian soldiers, Indian food supplies, and Indian railways to sustain the Asia-Pacific front. It was precisely at that moment that Gandhi stood before the All India Committee of the Congress in Bombay and pronounced 3 words he had thought over for a long time before saying them: "Quit India." Not after the war, not once conditions had settled. Right now. He explained with a calm that no one else in the room fully shared. He said that Britain's presence was itself what drew Japan toward the subcontinent, and that if India were a free nation, Japan would have no reason to attack it. He also said something deeper, plainly, that he did not want India liberated by the Japanese in place of the British, but wanted India to liberate itself by its own strength. And if the Quit India movement led to chaos, he said, then let it be the chaos of freedom rather than the order of servitude. On the night of August 8, 1942, the committee voted to pass the Quit India resolution. Gandhi addressed thousands at Gowalia Tank Maidan in Bombay and closed with words people would never forget: "Do or die. Either we free India or we die trying." It was the last speech he gave before his arrest. At dawn on August 9th, police arrived at Birla House and arrested him along with the entire leadership of the Congress less than 24 hours after his speech. Winston Churchill had been waiting for exactly this opportunity and ordered no leniency whatsoever. Nehru, Patel, Azad, and thousands of provincial and district leaders were arrested that same night. Gandhi was held at the Aga Khan Palace in Pune. Kasturba and a few close companions were permitted to stay with him. Across India, the Quit India movement erupted once its leaders were arrested, but with no organization, since everyone capable of organizing it was now in jail. People burned police stations, tore up railway tracks, and cut telegraph lines. The British responded by imprisoning more than 100,000 people, firing into crowds, and imposing collective flogging on entire villages found to have taken part in the movement. Gandhi sat in the Aga Khan Palace, hearing news arrive only in fragments. He grieved over the violence, but did not take back what he had said. He believed that even this disorganized uprising was sending an undeniable message, that the cost of holding on to India was becoming too high in every respect. But while history was unfolding outside, a private tragedy was quietly taking shape within the walls of the Aga Khan Palace. Kasturba Gandhi, the woman who had stood beside him for 62 years, was growing weaker by the day. She was 74 when she was interned alongside her husband. She developed chronic bronchitis and began suffering long spells of breathlessness. Doctors said she needed penicillin, a drug still very new and very scarce at the time. Gandhi first allowed natural and Ayurvedic remedies to be tried. Kasturba agreed, not because she fully believed in them, but because she had grown accustomed, over decades, to accepting her husband's decisions. The natural remedies did nothing. Their second son, Devdas Gandhi, begged his father to let his mother have penicillin. Several members of their circle pleaded as well. Gandhi eventually agreed, but by then Kasturba was too weak. The medicine came too late. On February 22nd, 1944, Kasturba Gandhi drew her last breath in her husband's arms. Gandhi sat beside her body for a long time without speaking. Those present said he did not cry right away. He simply held her hand and sat in silence. Afterward, he said he could not imagine life without her, that she had endured him longer and more than anyone else ever had, and that he did not feel he deserved that patience of hers. He kept a small urn holding a portion of her ashes on his desk for the remaining months of his life. 6 weeks after Kasturba's death, Gandhi fell seriously ill with severe malaria. This time, the British genuinely feared he might die in custody. They released him on May 6, 1944, after 2 years of confinement. Not out of any wish to, but out of fear of the political consequences if Gandhi died in their hands. He walked out of the Aga Khan Palace far thinner and far older than when he had walked in. His hair had gone completely white. His eyes had sunk deep into his face. But he still walked with his back straight and still spun thread every morning. The world was now changing faster than at any point in history. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. In August 1945, 2 atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Second World War ended. Britain had won the war, but was utterly exhausted. Its treasury was drained, its army worn out, and the British public no longer had any appetite for maintaining an empire spanning the globe. In July 1945, the Labour Party won the election and Clement Attlee became Prime Minister in Churchill's place. Attlee understood that granting India independence was now only a matter of timing and terms. But the great question was no longer whether India would gain independence. The question was which India would gain it. Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League had for years called for the creation of a separate state for Muslims called Pakistan, Land of the Pure in Urdu. Jinnah argued that Muslims and Hindus were fundamentally two distinct peoples, and that in a united India controlled by a Hindu majority, Muslims would remain forever a minority with no real voice. Gandhi opposed this with whatever strength he had left. He had spent his entire life building unity between Hindus and Muslims. The idea of splitting the subcontinent along religious lines struck him not merely as a political mistake, but as a betrayal of everything he had believed in and fought for. But history did not consult Gandhi. The years 1946 and 1947 brought the worst religious violence India had seen in the 20th century. In Calcutta, violence between Hindus and Muslims in August 1946 killed thousands of people within a few days. Bodies lay in the streets, homes were burned. Neighbors who had lived side by side for decades suddenly turned on one another for reasons even they could not have clearly explained if asked. Gandhi went to Calcutta. He walked alone without guards through neighborhoods still smoking from the violence. He knocked on the doors of houses that had shut themselves off in fear and sat down to talk with the people inside. He slept in Muslim homes, in Hindu-majority neighborhoods, and in Hindu homes in Muslim-majority neighborhoods to show that such division was not destiny. From Calcutta, he went on to Noakhali in Bengal, where thousands of Hindus were being attacked and forced to flee. He walked from village to village for 7 weeks, often alone or with only 1 or 2 companions, sleeping in the plainest homes, eating the simplest meals, and speaking to both Hindus and Muslims about what he believed to be the truth, that God did not want people killing one another in His name. He was 77 years old, walking through the waterlogged lands of northeastern Bengal on thin legs with his familiar bamboo staff. While Gandhi walked through Noakhali, in Delhi, the future of India was being negotiated. Nehru, Patel, and the last British Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, sat together in air-conditioned rooms, drawing lines across a map. In the end, Nehru and Patel accepted the plan for partition, not because they wanted it, but because they saw no other way to end the violence and achieve independence. Gandhi did not accept the decision, but neither could he stop it. He was the spiritual leader of the movement, but the final political decisions rested in other hands. The border was drawn by a British lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe, who had never set foot in India before, and completed the task within 5 weeks. The Radcliffe line cut through Punjab in the northwest and Bengal in the east, splitting regions that had once formed a single geographic, cultural, and economic whole into fragments belonging to 2 separate nations. On August 14, 1947, Pakistan declared its independence. On August 15, 1947, India declared its independence. In Delhi, millions of people poured into the streets to celebrate. Nehru delivered his famous speech about India's tryst with destiny. Fireworks lit up the sky. It was the moment millions had lived to see, and the moment millions of others had died before ever getting to witness. Gandhi was not in Delhi that night. He was in Calcutta, in a house in a poor Muslim neighborhood, fasting and praying for peace. On the day of India's independence, the man regarded as the father of that independence sat alone in the darkness of a room with no electricity and no celebration, worrying over people dying for one another's sake on both sides of newly drawn borders. The Radcliffe Line was officially announced on August 17th, 2 days after the independence celebrations, and once people actually looked at the map and understood what they had just lost, waves of migration and violence began. What happened in August and September of 1947 was one of the greatest humanitarian tragedies of the 20th century. Roughly 14 million people were forced to leave their homes and flee toward those who shared their religion. 2 enormous rivers of people moved in opposite directions along the same dusty roads, seeing each other, sometimes stopping to attack one another, sometimes simply staring back with eyes emptied by exhaustion, too spent to do anything more. More than 1 million people died in those months. Women were abducted and raped in large numbers on both sides. Children were separated from their parents and left wandering, no longer knowing where they belonged. Gandhi was in Calcutta as violence flared up there again. He announced he would fast until the violence stopped entirely, to the death if necessary. This time, leaders of both communities came to him and signed a pledge to protect one another. The violence in Calcutta stopped so abruptly that Mountbatten called it a one-man miracle. Where tens of thousands of soldiers in Punjab could not hold the peace, in Calcutta a single old man's fast had done it. Gandhi arrived in Delhi in September 1947 and began moving among the refugee camps overflowing with people pouring into the city from Pakistan. He met families who had lost everything. He sat beside mothers holding the bodies of their dead children. He listened to men describe things they had done or witnessed that they knew they would never be able to forget. His health declined rapidly in the final months of 1947. He grew so thin that photographers who saw him were visibly startled, but he continued going out every day as though his own body no longer mattered. He also began receiving threatening letters. Not the first threats of his life, but this time the tone was different. No one was threatening arrest or deportation anymore. People were threatening to kill him because he had betrayed Hindus by protecting Muslims, because he had forced India to pay Pakistan 55 million rupees, while Pakistan used that money to fight India in Kashmir. Gandhi knew these letters could be serious. He did not change his routine. In January 1948, he undertook the final fast of his life, demanding the government pay Pakistan the sum owed under the agreement and calling for peace in Delhi. After 5 days, the government agreed, and representatives of every religious community signed a pledge to keep the peace. Gandhi broke his fast. He was exhausted, but every afternoon he still went out to the grounds of Birla House to lead the public prayer meeting that hundreds of people came to attend. And some who came to Birla House did not come to pray. They came with other intentions. Beyond those quiet prayer gatherings, a conspiracy was taking shape in the shadows, fed by the anger of men who believed Gandhi had done India more harm than good, that his kindness toward Muslims was a betrayal of Hindus, and that the world would be better off without him. Gandhi knew the danger was drawing near. Those around him knew it too. And still, every afternoon, at the appointed hour, he walked out to the grounds, supported on either side by his 2 grandnieces. He could not have done otherwise, because if he stopped out of fear, then everything he had lived and taught over 78 years would no longer mean anything at all. Chapter 8. 3 Bullets. January 30th, 1948 began like an other day in Gandhi's life. He rose at 4 in the morning, bathed in cold water, sat in quiet meditation in the darkness before sunrise, ate a simple breakfast of goat's milk, fruit, and lemon water with honey. Nearly all his body could still digest after years of fasting had weakened his digestion. Then he began receiving visitors. There were a great many people to see that day. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Deputy Prime Minister, came to discuss the tense political situation. Relations between Patel and Nehru had grown strained enough that Gandhi feared an open rift, one that could weaken the entire government in these first years of independence. The conversation ran longer than expected. As a result, Gandhi was late for the evening prayer meeting. He usually began at 5 o'clock sharp, and being late bothered him, since he regarded punctuality as a form of respect for those waiting for him. Abha Gandhi, his grandnephew's wife, reminded him he was late. He rose, resting a hand on the shoulder of Abha and of Manu Gandhi, the 2 grandnieces who had taken to steadying him on his walks in recent weeks, since he had grown so thin and his legs were no longer as steady as before. He joked with them that they were his walking sticks, then stepped out the door. Hundreds of people had already gathered in the garden. Many came every day. Others had come for the first time, wanting to see Gandhi once in their lives. Gandhi walked out onto the grounds at 17 minutes past 5, 17 minutes late. As he appeared, the crowd pressed their palms together in greeting. He returned the gesture and continued walking toward the prayer platform, still resting his hands on his grandniece's shoulders. Somewhere in the crowd, a man was moving toward him. His name was Nathuram Vinayak Godse, 37 years old, a member of the Hindu nationalist organization Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. It was not Godse's first visit to Birla House. 12 days earlier, someone from his circle had thrown a homemade bomb at one of Gandhi's prayer meetings. It exploded, but caused no casualties, landing in the wrong spot. Gandhi continued the meeting as though nothing had happened. That incident should have led to tightened security. But Gandhi refused to have personal bodyguards. He said that if someone wanted to kill him and he were protected, that person would kill an innocent bystander instead of him, and that this was unacceptable. He also said that if his time to die had come, no wall could stop it. Police knew an assassination plot existed, but did not know who or when. Intelligence was scattered and not acted on quickly enough, and Godse had the full 12 days he needed to prepare for a second attempt. Godse wore ordinary clothes, nothing that stood out. He approached Gandhi from the front, coming close enough to press his palms together as if in greeting. A woman stood between him and Gandhi. He gently pushed her aside. Gandhi stopped and looked at Godse's face. Godse drew a Beretta M 1934 pistol and fired 3 shots in quick succession into Gandhi's chest from less than a meter away. 3 shots rang out through the silent garden. Witnesses said Gandhi uttered 2 words, "He Ram," Hindi for "Oh God." Then he fell, his hands still folded in Namaste. The garden broke into chaos. People screamed and ran. Abha and Manu knelt beside him, blood soaked through the thin white cloth over his chest. Godse stood still after firing. He did not run. He raised his hands as police rushed to seize him, as though he had steeled himself for this moment long before. Gandhi was carried into the house. Doctors were summoned immediately, but the 3 bullets had passed through his chest and abdomen, one striking the heart. Nothing could be done. Mahatma Gandhi was pronounced dead at 17 minutes past 5 in the afternoon on January 30th, 1948, the very same minute he had walked out of the room toward the garden. News spread across Delhi within minutes and across India within hours. Nehru was in a meeting when someone stepped in and whispered in his ear. He stood, walked out of the room, and did not return. He went to the radio station and delivered a speech with no prepared text, speaking only from his heart. The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. Our beloved friend and comrade, the father of our nation, whom we called Bapu, is no more among us. Outside Birla House, people began gathering early into the night. They came with no plan, simply because they had nowhere else to go. Many sat silently on the ground and wept. Many others simply stood staring at the gate, as though their gaze alone could pass through the walls to see him once more. On the morning of January 31st, Gandhi's body was placed on a flower-draped carriage and carried through the streets of Delhi. From Birla House to the cremation grounds at Raj Gate was roughly 8 kilometers, and the procession moved very slowly, since the crowds lining the road were too dense to allow any faster pace. More than 1 million people were estimated to have lined the route, though many witnesses believed the true number was far higher. People climbed onto rooftops, into trees, and crowded onto narrow balconies. The world beyond India came to a standstill as well. President Harry Truman of the United States called Gandhi's death a tragedy not only for India, but for all of humanity. Albert Einstein said that future generations would find it hard to believe that a man like Gandhi had ever walked the earth in flesh and blood. In London, the British House of Commons observed a minute of silence for the man their own empire had imprisoned so many times. The cremation took place on the afternoon of January 31st on the banks of the Yamuna River. The flames burned for 4 hours. His ashes were scattered into the Ganges at Allahabad as he had wished. A portion of the ashes was kept aside and later scattered into the ocean, since Gandhi had said he belonged to everyone, not to any single place. Nathuram Godse was tried along with his co-conspirators. During a trial that stretched over many months, he defended himself with an hours-long statement explaining his reasons for killing Gandhi. That Gandhi had betrayed Hindus through constant concessions to Muslims, and that those concessions had led to the creation of Pakistan and the massacre of Hindus there. He asked for no forgiveness. He showed no remorse. On November 15, 1949, Nathuram Godse was hanged at Ambala jail. Before his death, he asked that the national anthem be played and said he would look at the flag until the trapdoor fell. Godse's story did not end there. In the decades that followed, especially in recent years, certain extreme Hindu nationalist groups have sought to rehabilitate his image, calling him a patriot, erecting statues, and republishing his courtroom statement as a political text. This remains one of the most painful parts of Gandhi's legacy. The man who killed him was never fully buried by history. But what stands out more is what happened immediately after Gandhi's death. The wave of religious violence many feared would erupt once he was gone never came. Instead, Gandhi's death created a moment of shared grief in which Hindus and Muslims alike, both his followers and those who had opposed him, sat down together and wept. I had said throughout his life that something more frightening than death was living without the courage to live true to one's beliefs. And he had walked out into that garden every afternoon, knowing the danger, because to do otherwise would have been to betray everything he was. There is one small detail people often mention when telling the story of January 30th, 1948. When Gandhi was carried into the house, his shirt pocket held three things: the pocket watch he had worn for many years, the small notebook he used for jotting notes, and a small photograph of Kasturba. He had carried her with him every month since she died in prison 4 years earlier, and he departed with her still there, in the thin pocket of the shirt he wore every day. The cremation fire on the banks of the Yamuna burned for 4 hours before it went out. Smoke rose and dissolved into Delhi's evening sky. The river flowed on, as it had flowed for 1,000 years before, and would flow for 1,000 years after. And 1 million people stood on its banks, watching, and no one said a word. There is a question people often ask after Gandhi's death. Did he really change anything? This is not a question asked by those who hated him. It is a question asked by those who loved him most, people who looked at India after independence and saw religious violence, poverty, and caste injustice still standing, and wondered whether everything he had done had truly left anything behind. The answer is found not in India, but everywhere else in the world, in places Gandhi never once set foot, among people who never once saw his face, in movements that rose up decades after the cremation fire on the banks of the Yamuna had long since gone out. There is a line Gandhi wrote in a private letter discovered years after his death. He wrote that he did not know whether he was doing the right thing, did not know whether non-violence was the answer to every circumstance. The one thing he knew for certain was that he could not stop trying, because to stop trying would mean accepting that the world could not become better. And that was something he could not believe, whatever evidence stood before him. The questions he raised had no easy answers in his own time. They have no easy answers today either. How does one fight injustice without becoming unjust in turn? How does one hold on to dignity when everything around you is trying to take it away? But the fact that these questions are still being asked, that there are still people brave enough to ask them, that is what Gandhi truly left behind. Not a perfect country, not a formula guaranteeing victory, only a question asked again and again in the darkness of every difficult moment. Is there another way? And the answer he lived out over 78 years. The answer paid for with years in prison, with fasts that brought him to the edge of death, with a handful of salt lifted from the beach at Dandi one early morning in April 1930, still echoes. Yes, there is always another way. And that is why the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi will never rest.